And that means we're up to the number one song in the USA. It's by a guitar legend who says when he plays guitar, his body may be on stage or in a studio, but his mind is somewhere far, far away. Have you ever wondered what a guitar hero like Eric Clapton or Eddie Van Halen thinks about while they play? At their level of proficiency, they're not thinking about what note to play. They know that instinctively. So what's going through a guitar player's mind? Well, in the case of one of the greatest guitar players of the rock era, it's hair. That's right, hair. But not his own hair. He says he gets so caught up in the moment that his mind travels to a more tranquil place. He says, quote, "A lot of times when I'm playing a guitar solo, I transport myself home. I go there to comb my daughter's hair." Why his daughter's hair? Well, he says, quote, "She's got long, beautiful hair, and you have to do it in a certain way so you don't pull her hair and make her cry," unquote. And it's that finesse, that gentle touch, that this guitarist also applies to his instrument. An instrument that once again transports this down-to-earth legend to the top of the chart. The number one song in the USA on American Top 40 for the fifth week in a row is Smooth by guitar legend Carlos Santana, featuring Rob Thomas.
And that means we're up to the number one song in the USA on American Top 40. It's by a rock star who didn't like using his name as the name of his band. He figured if the band flopped, his name would be Mud. It was back in 1966 that this guitarist, who was just 19 years old at the time, decided that a band was the direction for him. Carlos Santana had been working on his sound with a couple of musician friends, percussion player Michael Carabello and keyboard player Greg Rowley. And they all agreed that they were ready to give it a try. They each came up with a list of names, but none of them had the energy or the fire that they wanted. Then Michael and Greg said to Carlos that as far as they were concerned, the name of the band should be his name. They should call it the Santana Blues Band. They said, quote, "It has a ring to it, a tone to it." Carlos says his reaction was along, well, you see, he figured if his name was on it, it would be seen as his band. And if it was his band, then he had to take the rap if it failed. He wasn't sure, but his partners prevailed. And these days, Carlos Santana says he's glad they did. Quote, "I'm grateful that it went down that way. It set the tone for the rest of my life." Unquote. Eventually, the band became Santana. And this week, Carlos Santana can be proud that his name is on a hit that once again is the biggest hit in the land. The number one song in the USA on American Top 40 for the 8th week in a row is Smooth by Santana featuring Rob Thomas.
Well, now we're up to a former number one song for a guitar superstar who's never had much of a following in London, England. But he recently earned a lot of goodwill there by simply giving a guitar pick to a young boy. Though Carlos Santana had a handful of small hits on the British charts back in the late 70s, he's never really had any significant success there. But with the many new fans who discovered him thanks to his new album Supernatural, his record company thought this was a good time for Carlos to try an appearance in London. He played a low-key showcase for London journalists. According to the reviewer from Q magazine, quote, "Most of the audience didn't have a clue who Carlos Santana was, but by the end of the set, his Latin rhythm had everybody." Other critics who showed up were also impressed by a simple act of kindness by Carlos. A young boy named Louis Jones had been taken to the show by his parents. The young boy was so entranced, he stood by the edge of the stage watching Carlos play. At one point, Carlos gave him a big smile, and then held out his hand. The young boy reached for him, expecting a handshake, and instead, he found a guitar pick in his hand. He said, quote, "I'm keeping it forever. It's my lucky charm." And the jaded writers in the audience went wild. This week, London's newest sensation has a lucky charm of his own. It's survey song number 13 on American Top 40. Here's Carlos Santana with Smooth.
Number 13.
Here's a musician who believes in the power of never following the same path. Carlos Santana says, quote, "The only time I ever feel old is when I allow myself to be predictable." Here's Carlos Santana at number 13 for a second week with singer Alex Band and Why Don't You and I. This week back in 1999, one of the top hits in the USA was Smooth. It's by a rock guitarist whose debut performance was followed by 12 encores. It was back in 1968. This guitar player was booked at the Fillmore Auditorium in San Francisco, home to the Grateful Dead and the Jefferson Airplane. This musician's performance lasted a little more than an hour, but the audience wouldn't let him go. Every time he came back to play another encore, the applause, the yelling, the screaming was so thunderous, he had to come back for another. During his 12 encores, he played every song he knew at least twice. And he might have come back for more, but rock impresario Bill Graham finally told the audience the show had to end. It was nearly dawn. This week back in 1999, that rock guitarist had one of the top hits in the USA.
American Top 20.
Well, now we're up to the song I'm Feeling You by a rock legend who doesn't sing. He says, I let my guitar do the singing for me. Carlos Santana first hit the top 40 back in 1970 with Evil Ways and Black Magic Woman. Back in those days, his vocalist was Greg Rowley. And over the years, Santana has used many band members on his songs. More recently, he's turned to guest singers for his vocals, stars on their own like Rob Thomas, Alex Band, and Michelle Branch. Why doesn't Carlos Santana sing? He says, quote, I could sing, but I think my voice is thin. It isn't right for my music. And anyway, I prefer to let my guitar do the singing for me. It has a beautiful voice. This week, Carlos and his guitar falls 7 notches to number 15 on our survey. Here's Santana with Michelle Branch and the Wreckers and I'm Feeling You.